Hello, Monal.
Hello.
Welcome to UXR Conversations, episode 4. How are you?
I'm doing well, and how are you?
I am good. I'm extremely excited to be speaking to you. We don't get enough chances, so thank you again so much for doing this.
Oh, thank you. This is
Um,
so much fun.
I'm not going to wait long before we jump straight into things, but before we do, a quick welcome to everyone who's watching now or who'll be watching later. This is UXR Conversations, where we talk about everything UX research related. I am Noam Segal, Director of User Research at Wellfront, and currently a full-time father on parental leave. Loads of fun. With me today is Monal Chokshi, former head of UX research at Lyft, and many other things we will talk about. In case anyone has questions or comments, please send us your questions by commenting on YouTube, preferably. That's the easiest for us to see, but I believe we should be seeing comments from Facebook or Twitter as well. And if it is on Facebook, I suggest you grant StreamYard, which is the platform we're using for these things, permission to see your name at streamyard.com/Facebook. Today, we are talking about research journeys. And I tend to think of journeys starting kind of, I guess, with academic studies, I suppose. That's kind of random, but I did my time in academia, and I know you have as well. You got your bachelor's degree in what the cool kids call SimSys, right?
Yeah.
SimSys. Symbolic Systems from Stanford. I'm not going to pretend I understand what that means, symbolic systems. I read a bit about how machines and humans can both understand symbols or something, and then or something like that. It's a degree only available at Stanford, correct?
Yeah. And, when I found it, it was very new, actually, because I started at Stanford in the mid 90s, and I think it was first graduating class might have been in the early 90s from SimSys. And my parents were like begging me not to do symbolic systems because they're like, nobody knows what that major is. You'll never get a job. And I just thought, well, this is so cool. It's an interdisciplinary major, um, taking into like core classes from computer science, philosophy, psychology, linguistics, and one of the focus of concentration areas was human computer interaction. And that was what I was really excited about. So, right during that time in the mid 90s was really when the internet was starting to, you know, come see the light and be part of our everyday lives. And, I was really excited by it.
Well, your parents were clearly wrong. I, I,
Thankfully.
I Thankfully, I collected two fun facts about that program. So the first is that the year you started in that program, there was another virus. Did you know that the Hatter virus was just going on? So there was
Oh,
another virus
I
making its
don't think
rounds,
I
and
knew
now it's
that.
coronavirus. It's just crazy.
Huh.
And then and then there have been many successful people who chose to study this
Yes.
topic. Among them is LinkedIn co-founder Reid Hoffman,
Yep.
former Yahoo CEO Marissa Mayer, Instagram co-founder Mike Krieger, Josh Ellman, who's a partner at Greylock, and now, of course, the biggest celebrity of all, you. Um,
Yeah,
so
no, I am the lowly former head of UX research at Lyft also.
what do you think when we think about academia and academic programs that can get you on a good start on your journey to becoming a UX researcher? There are some programs that are incredibly broad. I think Symbolic Systems is the best example. It's a combination of social sciences and behavioral sciences and computer science and AI and linguistics and math. And I'm probably missing out a few things. Um, Versus very specialized programs,
Mhm.
such as famous ones are programs at UW, in Seattle, or Carnegie Mellon, where you
Yep.
have these dedicated HCI programs. And then we have programs like the one I went to, where you study a particular topic like psychology, anthropology. From everything you've experienced personally and seen with researchers who have been on the teams you've worked on, what are your thoughts on how to make that decision between a very broad topic, a very narrow one? What do you think kind of works these days in our profession?
Yeah, I mean, back when I chose symbolic systems, it was most people never heard of anything that was human computer interaction related in terms of a degree. So it's a long time ago. And now I feel like there are a lot more choices, which is awesome for folks. And I'd say if you are in college or thinking about, um, you know, going into a program where it's either more broad or more narrow, I think one consideration is just know that whatever you pick, and if this is your end goal is to a career in UX research, you can still get there. So some programs I think focus more on like very practical skills, methodologies, things like that. Those are usually terminal master's programs that are focused on in HCI. And then there's other programs where, like psychology, you might learn specific set of skills. You might learn a lot about like statistical research, survey research, other kinds of experimental psychology research, and that kinds of thing. And at the end of the day, I think it's like, well, for me, it was following my heart and not listening to my parents who were telling me to be a computer science major. um, but we people in UXR are come from all different disciplines and not necessarily just even with HCI backgrounds. So yeah, there's lots of paths uh, coming in.
And why did you make the choice to move within academia from a program like Symbolic Systems to your master's degree, which is in cognitive science, right?
Mhm.
At UCSD, another great program. What was the decision there for you? What were you trying to learn more about at that point in your career?
Yeah. So after I graduated from Stanford, I spent 5 years working in this .com era, and did a lot of like UX, what we would call UX positions. And so it was kind of generalist from all the way like front end coding to design and research. There wasn't as much emphasis on research at the time. I mean, it was more the academic research or scientific research at some of the bigger companies. But I wanted to focus on what we call now UX research. And I wanted to get a job in that. And so the reason why I went to UC San Diego was because they had two different research labs there that were focused on understanding people through ethnography in order to design technology for everyday use. And I'm like, that's exactly what I want to do. And I was really excited by ethnographic research methods as a way to really learn about people, their behavior, and how we can design technology to fit in to our world.
I'm skipping a few things here, but you ended up at Yahoo.
Mhm.
Um, Which, by the way, I forgot, but when I was at Stanford a while back, I learnt about the origin of the name. It's not like Yahoo as in I'm happy or something. It stands for something, and I can't remember. Do you remember what it is? I
Oh,
can, if I had a producer, I would ask, but there's no one here helping out. So if anyone knows where the name is from and can remind us in the comments, that would be good. Um,
I
you
do
were
not
at
know.
yeah, it's a good. I should have done my research ahead of time. Um, you were there at a time when I feel there were two kind of revolutions in technology. One was social, which was really coming up at the time, and the other
Mhm.
was mobile.
Mhm.
So the dawn of the iPhone and smartphones, kind of as we know them today, the first generations. And I feel like that's another decision. Oh, there we go. Thank you. Thank you. Uh, Vinod Haran. Yet another, yet another hierarchical officious oracle. There you go.
Okay.
Um, funny name. So so you were there during these revolutions in a very special period in tech. And I feel like that's another decision that we need to make as researchers, kind of what we prioritize as we decide where to go next on our journey. Um,
Mhm,
One thing researchers can do is focus on cutting edge technology, whatever that means to you. I suppose AI, talk about symbolic systems, is a good example of that. Another is the space or the area. You've worked in multiple spaces. The latest one, I suppose, we could put under transportation, but you've worked in many other spaces as well. Why did you choose Yahoo, and also what do you feel about that that decision around? Do you focus on the space? Do you focus on the technology? Are there other things you think should be considered when making these sorts of decisions?
yeah, so I actually chose Yahoo for a different reason. So right after I finished my master's degree, I was, looking for a job as a UX researcher, and I was exploring different companies and trying to see what companies actually had those positions. And it seemed like I would either go more at that time, this was like 2006, agency, or it would be something like a big company like Google, Yahoo, eBay were all, they all had UX research teams. And at the end of the day, I ended up getting a few different offers, and I ended up going to Yahoo because I prior to my time at Yahoo, I felt like I was always the quote unquote expert at a startup company during the dot com time in terms of like UX and research because it was all so new and I actually had a degree focused on some of these things. But yet at the same time, I didn't feel like I was an expert and I wanted to learn, especially research from other people. And Yahoo in 2006 had a very like amazing UX research team, one that had been around for a while and had people, doing all kinds of different methodologies that I wanted to learn and participate in, and really kind of build that set of tools in my toolkit. Um, for example, I had an offer from Google as well at that time, and what one of the things that I kind of turned me off a little bit was that it was so new at Google in 2006 that what I heard was most of the folks doing UX research at Google at that time were doing usability studies. And I'm like, I know how to do usability studies. I've been doing them since 1997. I want to flourish and learn more. So that's why I chose to go to Yahoo.
It sounds like a consideration I didn't mention, which you just did, is kind of the space for growth and the space for learning. Is that
Hmm.
fair?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Um, you then went on, kind of jumping forward a couple of places. You also went to Intuit.
I did.
Um, and Scott Cook, who is the co-founder of Intuit, I think he's credited for creating this incredible design driven, innovative product development culture, which is focused on delight, on delighting customers, delighting users, um, which has been an inspiration for my CEO in the company I work for, Andy Ratcliffe, uh, who knows a lot of people in Silicon Valley,
Hmm.
given his former role as an investor, now head of Wealthfront. Um, it's an amazing opportunity working for these companies to learn so much about the product development, theories, practices, uh, different focuses on design frameworks and other things. What did your time at Intuit teach you, and what did you take from there onwards?
Yeah, a lot. Intuit is a great company, and I actually didn't even know how much of a design thinking focus Intuit had when I joined. And one of the things I love about Intuit and its culture is that they they try and get, I mean, in a sense, democratizing research, but they have a program called Innovation Catalysts, and I hope it's still there. I mean, I was there back in like 2011, 2012. Um, but it basically, you apply for this program. You can be a product manager, you can be an engineer, you can be a designer, and you learn design thinking skills. And then you bring that back to your team, and then you start, integrating that into your everyday work cycles. So it's great because UX researchers then usually have a partner on that team who gets it and can start like integrating that as well into the everyday work. Um, so I learned also more design thinking skills at that company, and I really saw how much of a difference it can make in terms of this being something that is advocated for and by leadership, and it's just part of the overall culture of how we work.
Is there a good way to evaluate this type of thing before you join a company? Because to your point, I mean, I can see huge value in learning the practices within a company like Intuit, and other companies, but it's really hard, I feel, sometimes to assess what that culture is, what those frameworks are. Um, I happen to have a good friend at Intuit right now, and so I hear a bit
Mhm.
from what he can share about how they think of design, but it's very difficult to find that information. Do you think it is available, and accessible, or do you just kind of have to take a chance with a company on your journey based on what you believe and kind of rumors about how the company handles design and research?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question, and it's definitely one that I think anyone should try to understand before they go to a company. And what is the research and design and product culture there? What might it look like for you to do work and collaborate with colleagues? All these things are really important to understand what your day to day might look like as a UX researcher. What challenges are you going to have? Where are you going to have to put your energy outside of just the work? Is it going to be a fight for resources? Is it going to be a fight to get integrated into the cycle? Or is everyone already accepting of research as part of the process and eager just to have you on as the expert and learn more? So learning these things, I mean, obviously, reading articles online about the company and talking to people, hopefully, people who aren't just trying to sell you on the company, but, real inside information in terms of what working at the company is really like, can be really helpful. But I mean, if you know, or if anyone out there knows the secret sauce, I'd love to hear it
Yeah.
since, you know,
You
I'll be
you
in
and
the
me
boat
both.
soon. Yeah.
You and me both.
Yeah.
Um, After Intuit, you went to SoundCloud, and
Mhm.
I think that was the first time you literally built a discipline.
Yeah.
Um, um, is that a stage in the journey that research managers should strive to experience? Um, do you think you can kind of get away with never building an entire discipline at a company? Do you think there's value in that? You've done it more than once at
Yeah.
this point. What's your thought on that this stage in the journey of building the entire research discipline from scratch?
It is not for the faint of heart. I will start with saying that. Um, I think it definitely takes somebody who is willing to roll up their sleeves and take on everything from the start. And it really depends too on what the expectations are going into the role. So, I've heard of folks who have been hired as the first researcher, but have been hired with a number of headcount and said, okay, get this started. You have 5 people to hire. Just hire them as soon as you can, whatever, like we know we need this and want this, and just go. And in the situations I've been in at both SoundCloud and Lyft, it's been, yeah, we want you to build a great team in time. And, but first, whoever was the one hiring you, it's like, yeah, like I have certain expectations and I have things that, I want you to see you do with this team or with this discipline. But you still have to sort of earn the right to get more headcount. And I think that's fair, you know. In some regards it's fair because it's just like, okay, you might have a few champions who are like, yes, we know what the value is, we believe in this, but there may be a lot of other people who've never had the pleasure or experience of working with research. Um, so, I think I'm hoping that there will be enough successes with folks in that current position and in that situation that it will permeate and more teams and companies will say, hey, we want to hire someone and then you have a headcount right away. But I just don't think that's the norm.
Do you think we're at a point in our profession um, where you're not kind of truly building discipline from scratch because there's a lot more awareness of what UX research is and is not, and what it can bring to teams that adopt it as a function? Because there was a time, I would say, not that long ago, when you were truly building a discipline in the sense that no one really knew what
Right.
UX research was. Um, and I think we're past that stage, but maybe you disagree, or kind of where do you think we're at in that evolution of our field?
um, so I mentioned this another interview, and I said that UX research is in its adolescence, and so that's sort of where I feel we're at. Um, yeah, definitely early on, like way back in the dot-com era, I mean, it was definitely new and it was primarily called usability rather than like user research or UX research or something like this. Um, and and it obviously it was much more narrow in terms of like how people thought of it. And I think we've grown past that today for a lot of us, but not everyone. I think being here in Silicon Valley, San Francisco Bay Area, um, a lot of companies have gotten over that hump. But when I went to SoundCloud 7 years ago, it was like taking a step back in time, where I was just like, oh my goodness, there's so much that's still not experienced by the folks over here. So it was a lot of education and evangelization. And then even when I went to Lyft, there were people who had never worked with UX researchers before as well. And I think a lot of times when you go into these startups with a lot of young folks who maybe this is their first job, like a lot of disciplines are new, but this especially is like, well, how do you fit in? So, you know, I'd say I wouldn't say we're quite over the hump yet, but we're getting closer. And I think the last like 5 to 10 years have been huge for our field.
I believe that just seems very different than the other companies on your research journey. Um, is there a common theme to your career choices? Did you have kind of a strategy? Am I missing something? How do you think about that progression, and how did Lyft fit in at the time for you?
Yeah, you know, I'm sort of a free spirit in that way where whatever kind of seems good for whatever reason at that time is kind of how I land. I don't really have like you know, a grand plan. It's just kind of come and go as I please type of thing. So Lyft was an interesting story because I think the first time I tried Lyft was on a trip back to the US from Berlin, where I was with SoundCloud. And the whole gig economy had sort of taken off in the US, or at least especially in San Francisco. And so when I came back, everyone was kind of abuzz about all of these services, especially Lyft. And I thought it was so interesting. And so when I interviewed there and a couple other companies, in the Bay Area and in San Francisco, and the reason why I went to Lyft primarily was, well, there were three reasons. One was the design team and the people. I just felt at home, and there's something about like the culture at Lyft where people are really friendly, open, and helpful. So I really had a nice feeling there, like I belonged. Um, and the other reasons, one was like the mission and the vision of the company and the co-founders, like really wanting to do good in the world, and always having that vision and mission from the start. Was I had read some articles about them and how the company started, and I realized like, hey, there's a lot of meaning behind this, and they really care about the people. So that was something I could get behind. And third was just the opportunity. I thought it was really interesting and cool, like being able to do research in a car, outside the car, and online, offline experiences. And it was something I hadn't experienced. I had taste of that kind of thing at SoundCloud because people take their music with them. But I thought this was a really interesting area to kind of do research in and get creative. So that's why I went there.
We have a question which I think it's a good time for right now from Tiana. Um, hey Monal, thanks for sharing about your career path. Could you please share your thoughts about when you joined Lyft and built the UX team? What was your vision and approach for the UXR team at that time? Can you think back to when that happened and kind of?
Oh yeah, yeah. It's funny. I remember it like almost yesterday. So when I joined, as I mentioned, I didn't have any headcount, but I was lucky enough to have the opportunity to bring someone onto the team internally early on. And this particular team member, he came from customer support. So while he didn't have any UX research experience, I saw potential in him, and he had a lot of empathy. He knew a lot about the product. He, understood like some of the pitfalls and struggles our customers were having with the product. So he was a great person to bring on board, and he became a very key and essential member to our team. Um, Generally, like though the vision was very much, because Lyft is so collaborative and product and design and engineering teams work so closely together, I wanted to ensure that as we grew the research team, we grew in an embedded fashion. I wanted each of the team members to be able to feel ownership for a certain area, a product area, and like a user type, so they could be the go-to expert for that type of user. And I was hoping that at some point we'd eventually have enough headcount to make that happen. And so it took some time before we could build up the credibility to gain more headcount, to hire more folks. And eventually we were able to get more of these leads in place and people to focus on specific areas. However, as our team was growing, the company was growing, our product offerings were growing, and so we just we kept adding more people on. And the one of the wins and moments that I'm really excited and proud of is the fact that when new teams started coming on board or starting out, for example, like our Lyft Bikes and Scooters team, one of the first people they asked for was a UX researcher, before they even formed the team. So it's like, all right, folks are really seeing the value and the impact that we're providing, and they want us from the start. So yeah, I mean, it was definitely, in a hyper growth company, in a very fast moving company. Um, People just want to run as quickly as possible, but I think sometimes it takes a little bit more effort and energy to ensure that the work is high quality, and that we're getting some research in there and people seeing that value soon like they start to change their processes to include it.
When you reflect on all of this, your career so far, and you think of the challenges that both ICs and research managers have and have had in the past, have those challenges changed much, or have they kind of stayed the same? And do you have an example, not a specific one necessarily, but just broadly speaking, of challenges that you've seen that are quite common, and any advice for ICs or managers there on how to kind of overcome those? But let's start with just, have they changed because our field has changed, or not so much?
You're asking if the expectations for ICs and managers have changed or what?
I'm asking if the challenges that they face have changed. You've
Mm.
been a manager for a while. You've worked with many ICs, I'm sure, on different teams in different companies. We all face our challenges as researchers. I'm wondering, A, if those challenges seem to have changed over time, and B, if you have kind of any examples or advice on how to overcome those, or what you've been seeing recently.
Yeah, that's interesting. I haven't thought a lot about the evolution in terms of what the expectations are. However, you know, more traditionally, I'd say, and perhaps this is the case still with bigger companies, managers have been seen as purely people managers. Um, and at least in terms of, in the case of like Lyft and maybe some other startups, I think managers sometimes are also expected to do other things, um, like additional types of work, and maybe not like research project work, but actually doing more than just people management. Um, so, and in terms of like, I see uh, like the evolutions of ICs or the challenges they face in terms that, of the work. Um, I think as people get up in seniority with ICs, and I don't know if this was necessarily always the case in the past. I would imagine it would have been, but at least my expectation is that they take on more leadership, and that doesn't necessarily have to mean people management, but leadership in terms of leading with ideas, leading with influence, and whatnot. So I'm really curious to hear, what your thought is
Well,
around this and kind of where your perspective is coming from.
Well, I would love to dive into two topics specifically. One is the idea that you just mentioned. So, in typical UX research teams, maybe just tech in general, we have this individual contributor track and the managerial, the people manager track, and we claim as managers, as leaders, that these tracks are parallel in every way, shape, or form, and you can choose to advance in one or the other, maybe move between them. But we claim that the opportunities are similar or even identical, I would say. And I just had a conversation about this with a former colleague of mine. Um, and I was wondering your thoughts, especially on the more senior levels, as an IC, what we sometimes call principal researcher, um, or we add a bunch of words to the principal, but usually it's this principal level, which in many companies is the equivalent of a director, or other very senior member of the company. Um, are we offering very senior researchers the same level of opportunity as we are to senior managers? Do we have a problem in the UX research field when it comes to that? What should a principal researcher be working on, or how can we set expectations and opportunities at a level that fits them?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really interesting topic. And I think it goes beyond just UX research. I think it goes, to design and product and other disciplines as well, because I think I've heard this being discussed for those disciplines as well. Like, okay, you might have several engineering directors, but how many, engineers do you have at that level, or designers at that level, or product managers at that level? So when it comes to UX research, the interesting thing is, depending on the company, there's also sort of a ceiling as to even on the managerial side as to how high you're going to get. And if you're the lead on a team, you might be that only person, and then on the IC side, um, there may be one person also at that level. But I don't know if it's um, I have a lot of thoughts right now, um, in terms of, like, fairness and what's right and what's wrong and everything else. So we could probably go on for a long time here, but yeah, I think it's traditionally it's been very hard for ICs to get to a level on par with managers and managerial. So if you have, an IC at a certain level and a manager at a certain level, there's probably more managers at that level than there are ICs at that level. And I'm not sure if that's actually true, for every company and every department, but that could be the case. I know that one potential reason for it is that a lot of folks, as they progress in their career, for whatever reason, you know, lean more towards the managerial side. And perhaps it's because they feel like that's where they'll have more of a seat at a table, or they'll have, you know, more authority in some senses, and they'll have more influence or impact on decision making. And I don't think that should be the case. And that's where I was getting at before, in terms of ICs kind of, as they get more senior, wanting them to have those opportunities for leadership and seats at the table and influence. And that's expected as well.
Absolutely. It's just difficult to do, right? And
Yeah.
think
I
about
mean,
this
you
a lot right
definitely have
now.
to have, like, a manager who is championing them for that and inviting them to the table and things, like that, like helping shape their career. But, you know, perhaps there aren't enough people who choose to go that route because they haven't seen other people in that role. So it's kind of a chicken and egg thing.
Yeah, and that's a great segue to a question we got here, and the question I was planning to ask around that. So, Fish Friends,
Yeah.
asks, what skills do you need to be a UX research manager? I wanted to ask you, if we shift to the management side for a second, kind of, what do you feel like the state of management is today in research and in general? How do you think of leveling up as a manager? Because we're always learning something, even with the significant experience you have. And how do you think of training others? I feel like we're in a bit of a crisis right now, honestly, with management, where we have a couple of great books and some Medium posts and maybe some classes you can take if your company is supportive in you doing that. But more often than not, people are not investing enough in themselves, and managers are not investing enough in the managers who are reporting
Yeah.
to them in terms of training.
Hmm.
Um, so, indeed, what skills do you need to be a UX research manager, and how do you build on that? And should we be focusing more on elevating managers and training them and teaching them?
Yeah, well, I absolutely agree with you. And I think there's a couple of, issues. One is, I think there have been more trainings out there for managers that I've kind of seen, and Lyft does a really good job of having, a centralized, kind of learning and development, um, department that focuses on training for ICs and for managers and directors and folks. So I really appreciate, those offerings and those trainings, but a lot of them are kind of basic level in a sense, where, and you can only get so specific. So then I think the next step is, getting like a career or executive coach, because then you can get a lot more one-on-one coaching. And, it would be great to also have a mentor and like a manager who takes the time and to coach. And that's something that I actually really enjoy, is coaching directs and coaching other people. And I would love to see more managers see that not just as something they could do, but something they should do, as a part of their roles and responsibilities. I feel like a lot of times managers are just so caught up in like handling so many other things, like their inbox is exploding, they're going to meetings and this and that, and one-on-ones should really be about you know giving to whoever your direct report is, whether it is an IC or a manager, and coaching them in that way. um, so yeah, absolutely agree in terms of we are in a bit of a crisis, and there's still lots of companies where they are young, are quickly growing, and are needing to have more management, yet those people who enter management positions don't always have the experience to do it well. So being able to train them and get them mentorship is really important. Okay, so getting back to fish friends, yeah, question. Um, Skills you need to be a UX research manager. Well, I think all the skills to be a manager, period, are important. And in particular for UX research, I think it's very helpful to have the knowledge and expertise of UX research methodologies and practices and things like that, just because you will then be able to empathize with your direct reports, as well as help mentor them in the actual craft and skill too. Shameless plug for the talk that I gave last year at the UX Research Conference in Toronto. It was called How to Succeed as a UX Research Manager. And so you can check that out. And it gives a lot of tips on management in general, and especially as UX researchers.
I was in the room. It was excellent. It was very uplifting, that
Thank
talk. So
you.
thank you for that.
Oh, thanks,
Um,
Noam.
I have a couple more things before we end today. We have a question from a fan on Twitter. He sent it yesterday, and I wanted to make sure I asked this. So this is Vijay asking, I wonder how you were able to split your time between kind of UX research work and the responsibilities of getting the insights that need to be there, and thinking about the bigger, more holistic picture of what the research could look like at Lyft long term. What lessons did you learn about that role balance between delivering the research, delivering the insights, and the more strategic, holistic picture of what it could look like down the line?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I'd say earlier on, I it's funny because I remember thinking like, what's happening right now? After being at Lyft for a few months, I remember one night, um, some friends calling me up and saying, "Hey, like we're going out, come join us." And I was still at work, and I chose to stay at work. And because I was so excited about what I was working on, that I chose work over play, which was very scary to me initially. Like, this is a first. But the reason why I bring that up is because I spent a lot of time, not just doing the work, but also thinking about the future. And I was really excited about everything going on. And so I'd say, I probably spent a lot of extra time thinking through the many different things that we could be doing and should be doing, and started working on. So even though I did split my time really well up front, I was spending a lot of time doing it. So I think as I moved on, the work there and the team grew. Excuse me. There was a lot more work to be done, and I probably I'd still ended up spending a lot of time thinking about how the team should grow and can grow, and the vision. And working at a startup, especially a hyper growth startup, there are changes like, every year, every month, every week, almost every day. So, one of the things that I was constantly doing was revisiting like an org chart and resources and how are we going to fill this need, and thinking about every person on the team and what is their career goal and desire, and desired trajectory, and how can we get them into a role that's more like this, and the business needs that.
Yeah.
And it was like this really big game of Tetris. So we kind of had this like spreadsheet, Tetris game spreadsheet on the side that I would revisit, at least every week, in thinking about the future. So that was always there, and actually was really fun for me. So it didn't feel like something I had to go and look at, but something I just kind of got excited to look at. So the balance is tough, though. I'll definitely say that. Yeah.
Well, thanks, Ash, and thanks for Jay for asking the question. I have one last thing. You recently left Lyft,
Yeah.
and I imagine it's been a period of reflection for you. And I wanted to ask you, what are you most excited about, kind of looking forward to whatever you do next? What are you most excited about for yourself? And what are you most excited about for the rest of us in terms of where our field is going, the opportunities that are out there? As you look forward and kind of reflect on what you want to do next, what do you find exciting, thrilling once we get past this insane global pandemic and all the craziness that's
Yeah.
going on in the world?
Yeah. Great questions. Right now, for me personally, I'm just excited to be, period. And I've thought a little bit about, what's next, but I'd say, um, people are super important. And I think, that's one of the things I've reflected on, what made my work at Lyft so fulfilling, is just coming and seeing my team every day. Wonderful people, so inspirational, so smart, and so talented, and I just learned so much. So, yeah, I really will be eager to be in an environment where there's great folks and people to learn from and work with and collaborate, because that's what life's all about, is people. And then in terms of like the future for UX research, I'm excited for us to continue to grow and show our value, and you know continue on our journey of being more strategic, affecting decisions at the highest level, and collaborating with other research and insights groups so that we can together tell, a single voice of truth, and show, you know, our impact in terms of like really robust insights. So, yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you again so much for talking. We are out of time. Before we end, um, what can people reach out to you for, and how can they do so if you're open to it? What's the best way?
Yeah, absolutely. Twitter is just my full name. It's my handle, Monal Choksi. And I'm also at LinkedIn. So find me there. It's just /Monal. And yeah, I'd love to hear from you. So feel free to reach out.
Awesome. Well, this was a ton of fun, and I can't wait until we talk again, even if it's not a live streamed
Yeah,
conversation.
same.
Um, if anyone out there wants to have a UX research conversation as well, this is where you can find me. We're also happy to take additional questions after this. Just message us on Twitter or email. We're sorry if we couldn't get to all of the questions today. But please do be in touch and hit the subscribe button on YouTube if you want updates on more conversations. The next one is coming on Friday. We have a bunch lined up for the coming weeks. It's going to be fun. And as long as we're stuck at home, why not? Let's keep this thing going. So, Monal, thank you. Stay healthy, everyone. Stay safe.
Yeah, thanks
Um,
so much, Noam. And thanks for everyone who tuned in. And I hope to see you all soon in the real world.